Welcome to Media and Monuments podcast, presented by Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. Media and Monuments is conversations featuring industry pros speaking on a wide range of topics of interest to media makers.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another installment of our recurring segment, How I Got It Made. I'm your host, Candice Bloch. Each month, I sit down with two different WIF members and chat with these filmmakers about one or two of their successfully completed projects. We discuss their journey and process as we delve into how they got it made. On this episode, I have a conversation with Maggie Stogner, and after that, I talk with Laura Seltzer-Duny. I'm sitting down with Maggie Burnette Stogner, an award-winning veteran of the filmmaking industry. She is the executive director of the Center for Environmental Filmmaking, a professor of film and media arts at American University, the founder of the independent production company Blue Bear Films. She's a documentary writer, producer, and director who spent many years producing films with National Geographic and others, as well as immersive media for exhibitions throughout the world. Maggie is an educator and creator committed to producing opportunities, experiences, and work that are catalysts for meaningful change through compelling storytelling. And she's also an executive member of WIF. So, hi, Maggie. It's an honor to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
So we're going to delve into a couple of your current pieces or more recent pieces, Unbreathable, The Fight for Healthy Air, and Upstream Downriver. But before we talk about those, just for listeners to get to know you a little bit more, how did you get into this? And when did you kind of decide that documentary and like educational type things was going to be your main focus?
Oh, my story is a total cliche. My parents gave me that little camera when I was 10, and I loved going out in nature and taking photographs and honing the way I saw the world, I think was what captured my attention, is that it just intensifies your connection, especially with nature. So it went from there. But I also grew up in Berkeley. I grew up with a pretty politically activist family. And so I saw from a very young age kind of the power of storytelling to further to advocate for certain issues.
You primarily are a producer and director, is that correct?
I saw myself, I think, originally always as a writer.
Okay.
I just love to write. I think there's something about playing with words. And then the visuals came as well. And then it really was understanding how those work together. Mm-hmm. To create that full story, that mood, that way of just revealing things that can be interesting, and how to connect people on a really visceral level, on that real human level. But yeah, so I would say director, writer, producer.
Okay.
I do a lot of producing because in documentary, particularly lower budgeted documentaries, you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
But my favorite arena is definitely in the directing and the writing.
Is there a particular filmmaker that has been an inspiration to you, or someone that when you were first starting out were trying to emulate it all or using as inspiration?
I always laugh at that question because there's so many. I mean, I had the very good fortune of being mentored early on by some extraordinary filmmakers. I ended up going to the Stanford documentary program for my graduate degree, just a really fortunate gift that was life-changing for me. And through that program, met a lot of filmmakers, watched a lot of films, and going forward worked both in documentary, some in feature films, some in interactive. And it was just a constant process of wanting to learn more and just having these incredibly generous people as mentors. So I can't single out anyone.
Yeah, no, that's hard. We're going to talk a little bit more specifically about a couple of films. Unbreathable, The Fight for Healthy Air, which is a 30-minute film about the challenges we've faced and continue to face in the struggle to have clean air for everyone. And Upstream Downriver, which is, I'm assuming about, well, you can tell us more about each of those. You're the executive producer and director of both of those?
I'm the director, writer, producer, executive producer.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, I wear a lot of hats. When I first started out filmmaking, I worked across all sorts of different films, and it was really interesting to work in the independent world where people are struggling to make independent films about really important issues. And then I went into more work for hire. So at Apple Computer, and then I had a production company, and then ended up at National Geographic. Thank you, Lauren Cardillo, executive member of WIP. And so it was a different experience when you still have to pitch films, but when you know the money is there to make films and you're going to be fully funded at the very beginning of the process. And so that's a very different experience than I think what a lot of independent filmmakers go through in trying to raise funds for their films and the ongoing kind of process of finding partnerships and reaching out to people and saying, hey, I've got this really great project going and could you help support it? And it's not easy. So it's two different pathways for a lot of people.
Can you tell people just a little bit about like one or two sentences about what each of those films are about before we kind of delve into a little bit more of the specifics of how they were created?
Yeah. So Unbreathable, The Fight for Healthy Air, I made in time for the 50-year anniversary of the Clean Air Act. So it looks at the milestones over 50 years, the bipartisanship that went into creating this amazing set of laws, as well as community and very personal stories so that it puts a face on what does that mean. And the communities that are still struggling with unhealthy air and what they're trying to do to ensure clean air for everyone. The film I'm working on right now, Upstream Downriver, we're hitting the 50-year anniversary of the Clean Water Act this year. So it is looking again at communities working so hard to make sure that there's healthy waterways for everyone. That upstream, downriver, the watershed idea, which can go across multiple states, and the milestones and the laws that we have to work with from the Clean Water Act. But it really goes beyond, both of the films go beyond just what can you do with these laws. Both of the films are about civic engagement and community engagement. In some ways, we've kind of lost our way with knowing that we are the government, right? We are the people in power. So we're really trying with these films to create kind of mobilization tools, catalyst tools to be used by a wide range of organizations to get people on board with, yes, we can really make change happen if we come together.
Yeah, that's great. Those are two crucially important subjects. So thank you for making those films, for one. So when you're making these, obviously for these, you had 50th anniversaries of milestone events, but in general, when do you realize a cause or a subject is something that you want to turn into a documentary, or you feel like you've got enough to make it into a piece that can have this visual storytelling element to get out there?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, why does anybody make any one film? And being able to articulate that is super important. So for me, it does come down to, I have to be connected to it somehow. I mean, it has to be something that I know I'm going to live with. I'm going to breathe, and it's going to be just that cloud that follows me around everywhere for not just a year, but several years, right? I mean, I think that was my naivete when I first started out in filmmaking, was thinking, okay, I've got a film project, I'm going to get it started and have it done in 6 months. Nope. Does not happen that way, at least not in the independent film world. So it has to be meaningful on a sustainable level for the filmmaker, I mean, and the filmmaking team, because it's not easy. It's not an easy road. So nature, clean water, clean air, I mean, that was very much what I grew up with and appreciated, and grew up with an appreciation of being able to have that. I mean, from the time I was very young, backpacking in the Sierra Mountains, and we just took our cups and had water right out of the snowmelt streams. And then seeing things degrade over time, and then in the Trump administration, seeing things really get hammered in terms of regulatory policy and protecting and our amazing country, and it needs to be protected. So I was very motivated, very motivated. I had great partners on Unbreathable. The Center for Environmental Policy at American University reached out to me and asked if I would put a short film together for a symposium that they were organizing. And we started talking, and the more we talked, the more it became really clear that this was so much bigger than just, a little kind of archival film. Let's do something bigger. And fortunately, the American Lung Association came on board as a partner, and we were able to create something that wasn't just about the policy, but really, importantly, very much about communities fighting and how they go about just the communities that have been struggling for years, like in Cancer Alley for 40 years, they've been struggling to get rid of these polluting plants that are causing so much cancer. That region, to more hopeful stories where the last story in Unbreathable is about a group of high school kids who came together because they learned that there was going to be an incinerator built just a mile from their school in Baltimore, in Curtis Bay, and yet another incinerator in Baltimore, right? So they founded an organization called Free Your Voice. They came together and got the entire community involved in blocking this incinerator. And after 3 years, they succeeded.
Yay!
And we can't be all gloom and doom.
Yeah, you have to leave some hope.
There.
Yeah. I think it's powerful to have that as well, so it doesn't feel like something that's completely insurmountable.
Exactly. You have to have that. You have to have the hope. So it's those kinds of motivators. And then, of course, that project is continuing. That film, the website, the webinars, the environmental toolkits that are on the website, that just continues to be used all over the place, all over the country. I just had a screening last week with the Alliance of Nurses for a Healthy Environment.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. I mean, these particular types of issues they've got staying power for these projects. It's not about something that happened. It's about something that's happening still. So,
right. And I think that's an important part of going into a project, particularly now that we have so many opportunities to do outreach in many different ways, is to go into the project thinking about all those different potential partnerships and potential outreach opportunities.
Does that help when you're starting a piece to think of its full lifespan beyond and things like outreach? Do you start thinking about that right from the onset?
Yeah, very much. I mean, outreach at the very beginning of the project.
Does that help with funding it at all or getting those partnerships? Do you reach out immediately to say that you're going to be doing a project, or do you like to have a little bit started to show them?
Oh, you need something just to make it real. So a website is just, even if it's bare bones, but it has to look good, but it doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. So a good website, a strong trailer are absolutely essential. That just grounds it in making it feel real. Putting a good, strong team together, a diverse team that can represent different perspectives, that grounds it in making it a real project. So I think starting there, and then really looking at those partnerships as strategic partners throughout the entire process. People love to be involved in film, right? So having that strategic partnerships all the way through, because at the end of the day, then that is also going to help you with your distribution. Mm-hmm. And so it helps with the funding, because then you start to show that you're going to have a built-in distribution. Mm-hmm. When you get to the point where the film is finished.
So do you start with sort of an overall structure of the story, and then you start interviews? And how, for people that are curious, what is the timeline? I know it's an ongoing process, but what are some of the initial things that you have to start doing right away?
When I first am thinking about a film, you need that one paragraph, even that one sentence that defines it. And a great title. I can't tell you how important a great title is. And then from there, you really need to build a strong team and start to look at the stories. With Unbreathable, The Fight for Healthy Air, and Upstream Downriver, there's some built-in content that I know that we're going to use archival, give a perspective, but then we very much start to look at what are the specific stories that really humanize the issue and put a face on it and connect with audiences. And so we're going through that process right now, looking at the stories that represent some of the most egregious instances of unhealthy air or unhealthy waters, and then some that really provide hope, and then some that really look at innovation and what are some of the new innovations, and then casting forward with Upstream Downriver, because of our increasing impact from the climate crisis, is important as well. So that's on one side. And then on the other side, we start looking at, okay, who are the great interviews on the policy side, and who are we involving on that side as well? So something else I want to talk about, because I think this is a turning point. We've seen a lot of change in our media landscape. It's so fragmented now, and it can be very intimidating and very just daunting to figure out, okay, what does distribution even mean anymore? And unless you've got a huge budget and you're doing a major streaming on Netflix or something, how do you do a smaller film, an independent film that is going to get distribution and going to get out to people? And that's why it's it's so important to start thinking about the impact and the partnerships from the very beginning, because you can do different iterations. So for instance, with Upstream Downriver, we'll do a longer film, but we're also doing a constellation of short videos to represent different perspectives from across the country, with the idea that then on our website, we'll have a story map, and you can go to the different stories across the country and connect with different organizations through the Clean Water for All Consortium and the American Rivers, and find specific resources for those areas. So having that vision and then filling in the puzzle pieces is a really great approach, as long as you're willing to hang in with that project for quite some time.
You had mentioned archival footage and everything as a nice base. So where do you go for most of that? Is it National Archives originally? Because that's all right here. Are there places that are resources that people might not think or might not know about that are great sources of archival stuff?
Oh, great question. I love archival. There's so much in the archives, and so much is being digitized now that it's just a treasure trove of great material. So there are the big ones, Library of Congress, National Archives, but because so much is being digitized, the New York Public Library has an amazing amount of archive available at high res. So you're not having to go through that process of, oh, what do I want? Okay, here's the low res, or it's watermarked, and then I have to go back. And they were one of the first to do that. Smithsonian has its 2.0 project, so they have quite a bit also digitized. So, but I think what I really appreciate are the historical societies, because they're so dedicated to bring forward the history. They have great stories, and you can find archive that isn't used constantly. You find gems. I was a director, producer, writer on a film called Gold Mountain. It was actually a 3-hour series, and I did the middle hour. And we had a huge number of archive elements just in 1 hour to tell the history of pioneering Chinese in the Old West and their contribution to building the infrastructure of the West, the Transcontinental Railroad, and others. The same images have been used over and over again every time that story is told. And we were fortunate to have the budget to be able to look deeper and actually digitize for the first time some early imagery. And the historical societies were just amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's fun to really hunt for it, because sometimes those new images are what really makes the difference in telling the story. Those new old images, I should say.
Right. The previously not seen enough. And then once you have all of those, I know keeping it sort of, if it's a still image, for example, keeping it dynamic and interesting, what are some of the ways that you like to utilize, whether it be like music or sound effects or animations or things like that? How do you bring a lot of your supplemental stuff to life that's not interview?
With archive, it's interesting. I always try to find faces, because we connect with faces, we connect with eyes. So if I'm doing 2-point or 3-point moves on an image, I'm just going to move right up into the face, into those eyes, so we can connect with that person. Then, yes, there's music, there's sound effects, all of those elements. Good sound design absolutely can bring alive archive. And I've worked a lot with different archive in the historical role, museum exhibitions that I've done films for. And sometimes it's the image is enough, or the footage clip is enough. You don't need to add soundtracks to it.
Yeah.
You can leave it to somebody's imagination. It's a little bit different in the museum world, because you have sound spill issues and things like that. So you don't always want to add a whole lot of soundtrack. But finding something in between, I like to just hint at and to spark the imagination. Same with reenactments, kind of impressionistic reenactments, or things that don't try to get into too much detail, because sparking that imagination is really what involves the audience.
As an educator yourself, how important is it to you to bring on students and people learning and new people and fresh blood into each project, as opposed to, I'm sure there's veterans that you collaborate with time and time again, but how important is it to bring in the new blood?
I think it's incredibly important that we provide growing opportunities for the next generation. Film is changing all the time. Film, short video, digital video, social media video. It's a new world. And so I think that the educational flow is both ways, right? I was fortunate to have good mentors, and I think it's important that people who have been around a while really take that seriously and mentor the next generation.
What has been some of the most exciting new sort of technological advances that have helped you do things differently, whether it's lighter, easier camera equipment, things like that, in terms of documentary? Kind of in conjunction with that, how much of these particular documentaries did you source material versus create your own new material?
I like wherever possible to get as much of the original footage ourselves. I think that there's a certain cohesiveness to the design and the style and the aesthetic that's really important. And so being able to capture as much footage rather than have to buy stock through Pond 5 or whatever, there's always going to be gaps, or sometimes you just don't have the budget to go out and travel to that one more location. So for some of the contextual footage, you might draw on other sources, but for the primary footage that's not archival, I really like to make as much of it as possible original. I really enjoy interviewing people. I think that's key to being able to just have a conversation with somebody and get beyond that veneer and really have them talk about something on a deeper level is really something that makes it powerful and compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to get that through stock footage, right? So yeah, it means a bigger commitment to trying to raise funds.
I'm sure it's great even nowadays with some of these issues and stuff that everyone has a camera in their hand nowadays. So the quality of some of that stuff, I'm sure there's a lot more to draw from if there's a particular, like at a protest or something, there's more footage, things like that.
Yeah, there are definitely reasons to source footage from multiple sources.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You had mentioned lighter equipment. That's been just amazing that I can go out with a camera on Gold Mountain. We tromped up into the Donner Summit area with all our equipment, but it's lighter equipment. And we even had Movi that could simulate jib shots. I mean, just even 10 years ago, I don't know if that would have been possible.
Yeah, and drones and things too. Like there's so many other perspectives.
Drones. Yeah. Oh my gosh, drones are amazing. I mean, my students today are doing just incredible work, and they all into drones, into different kinds of stabilizing equipment, GoPros, mounted cameras. I mean, we have a lot of toys to play with that are not very expensive.
Yeah, it's so much more accessible.
So, yeah, more accessible. And if it's motivated, you really can do some amazing storytelling.
Is there anything that you could think of on these particular films that jumped out as like an unforeseen obstacle that you had to deal with?
I kind of see documentary filmmaking, at least independent documentary filmmaking, as one long series of obstacles. Yeah. I love puzzles.
It's an obstacle course that you're doing.
Yeah. It's an obstacle course. So I kind of think of it as one big puzzle, and how am I going to fit the pieces together? And part of the fun of documentary is you really have to draw on kind of a spontaneity, and there's a serendipity where, oh, that happened. Okay, what are we going to do now? We got to figure out the next solution. A lot of creative problem solving. I think it's a lot of fun. It could be frustrating. We certainly hit a wall at certain points in the process, but generally, if you keep the right kind of attitude, it can be a lot of fun.
These take, as you said, a very long time. Would you consider like Unbreathable? You said you're still working on Upstream Downriver, but Unbreathable, is that considered done? We would consider that done for now?
Yeah, Unbreathable premiered in 2020 with the DC Environmental Film Festival.
And so how long do you think that took? Just so people can get a general sense on that particular one. How long start to finish for the most part?
Actually, it went pretty quickly. It took about 2 years, and we got shut down basically because of COVID in March of 2020. And I had thought we'd do a 30-minute, but also then a longer film, and we stuck with just the 30-minute. In fact, a funny story, our very last interview was with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the Gold's Gym in Venice Beach in California at 7 o'clock in the morning. But he was the first governor to sign a Global Warming Act into being in 2006. And I really wanted this bipartisanship through the film, so I really wanted to get an interview with him, and that was it. And then we got shut down. But 30 minutes in the virtual world, it just turned out to work incredibly well. I think people think, oh, I've got to make the 90-minute feature film. There's certain things you can't do with the 30-minute, but there's a whole lot today that you can do with the 30-minute, and it's perfect for that virtual 1-hour programming. You have the half-hour film, you have the panel, you have the Q&A. Done. And we still are just going really strong with a lot of different webinars and virtual screening events.
For the Upstream Downriver, when did you start on that one? Because that one's still going.
I started thinking about it right on the heels of the Clean Air Act of Unbreathable, and I started to do a little bit of research, but really didn't get into the full swing until probably about a year ago now. But again, pretty fast. I mean, we're behind schedule at this point. Fundraising has been tough right now, but we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be exactly where we want to be when we want to be there, but we'll have something.
Yeah.
And we'll continue.
Sounds like being adaptable is the name of the game here. So,
well, this is where at a certain point I finally did learn to be more patient because I recognize that you can put all your energy into it and still not get to where you want to be. But if you think longer term, it's not like a switch just goes off and the issue is done. You think longer term and you think about, okay, well, if I can't get here, I can at least have this done by this date and continue to build because the issue is not going away. So that mindset has calmed me down a little bit.
It's a helpful note for people. You have to have that type of mentality, or it helps to have that. And so you're working on multiple things. For a particular thing that you're totally invested in, do you like to keep it no more than a certain number of projects sort of going on the stove or whatever at the same time for your sort of mental, emotional health? Or do you just take what you can based on what's happening in each thing? Or
I think what I've learned over time is that my projects need to dovetail somehow. If there are too many completely separate projects, you just drives you crazy, really. So if you can get your projects to dovetail, for instance, I'm doing some impact media research funded by HMI Tanglebank Studios, and Unbreathable is a case study for that. So there's a dovetail there, and it's really looking at how you can start building that impact from the very beginning of a project. That website is cefimpactmedia.org. And I'm open to people sending me case study ideas because we're really looking at innovative ways to create that impact starting at the very beginning and then really strategically thinking about how you make your film to reach and have the impact that you want over time. And there are many ways to do that. And I mean, again, we're in an exciting time period. I mean, frustrating in some ways, but very exciting at all the opportunities we have to do that. So as long as there's some overlap between the projects,
that helps.
I can see what he's saying. But if there's not, I have to pull back because it doesn't do any one project justice if you're spread too thin.
Have you seen in these films already with Unbreathable, for example, any policy changes or things that have come from the sort of education and the awareness that these films aim to get? Do you measure like the success based on how many people are seeing it? If it actually creates change, do you follow up on them to see what has happened?
Evaluating impact is really a challenge beyond just, how many likes or how many views. So we definitely have tracked. I think one of our key indicators that the film has made a difference is the fact that it keeps getting picked up by different organizations through word of mouth. So it's just gone from, here we had kind of our list of people we thought would want to screen the film. So the American Lung Association through their Stand Up for Clean Air campaign, state chapters, U.S. Climate Action Network, Eco America. But then out of nowhere comes another organization that says, hey, we'd like to use your film. So that's a success benchmark for me that, yes, it's getting out there, it's being used. People are getting a positive response from how they're using it and how they're engaging. Has policy changed because of the film? I hope so. I can say I know that people have gotten engaged with the topic. So we know that. And at this point, it's a lot of people through a lot of different organizations, from environmental to health. It's multi-layered, multifaceted, but direct policy change, that's harder to measure.
Well, at least you're getting more people to see it, which could inspire them to do more on multiple levels and make the impacts that they can for something that's very important for all of us, especially with these. I mean, we all breathe and we all need water to live.
You've seen the film, right? I mean, it's 20,000 breaths a day.
Oh, wow.
That's statistic surprised me, but that's why I opened the film with that. 20,000 breaths a day. We all breathe.
Before we kind of let people know where they can find these films and learn more about you and everything, is there any particular advice that we haven't gone over that you would give to someone looking to get into the filmmaking or documentary filmmaking space that hasn't been said before, or maybe something that you don't hear very often but you thought would have been really good to know at the beginning for yourself?
I think one thing that's super important is understanding that there's a whole community. Women in Film and Video provides an amazing community. So if you do decide you're starting out, you want to test the waters and see if, filmmaking's for you, and you wade into those waters, just know that there's a lot of other people out there that can help support you. And we all get in that space where we're going, oh my God, why did I ever start on this project? Is the funding ever going to come? What am I doing? And then you reach out to somebody and you say, hey, do you want to go have coffee? Talk me off the cliff.
Yeah.
I love women in film and video. I came to a meeting when I first came out to DC, and somebody invited me to a meeting, and I think it was one of their awards events. And I thought, wow, what an amazing group of really supportive people. And so I think it's important to recognize that. It's also important to know that if you are working on independent films, it is going to be tough. And that's why it's super important to think hard about what you choose to work on. And that's true even in work for hire. Be strategic about your career. I bounced around a lot. Just, okay, I'll go over here, I'll go over there. And then finally I thought, no, I need to get a little more focused on what I'm doing. It would have been good if maybe I got a little more focused early on, but I really didn't know. And I don't have a lot of regrets. I think it's make the most of it.
Yeah, you have to learn what you don't want by doing it too sometimes.
That's right. The journey is the reward. I really encourage people to embrace that. It's not the end product. Sure, we all think, great, we have this film, we have another credit or whatever it is. But if that journey isn't satisfying, if that process isn't satisfying, you really have to think about what you're doing.
If anyone wants to see Unbreathable, the fight for healthy air, how would they go about doing that? And when might they be able to see Upstream Downriver?
Our website, very easy. It's just unbreathable.org. And there's information for how to license the film, to screen the film. It's also available on Canopy, so you can go see it on Canopy. It's not available through Amazon Prime or any of those at this point because we're just finishing up the festival circuit. But go on the website, and if you are interested in using it for a screening, there's some information you can fill out so you can connect with our outreach producer, Elizabeth Hertzfeld-Kamprith, who's amazing, a producer on the film and the outreach producer, and now she's producer on Upstream Downriver. So Upstream Downriver, also easy to find, just upstreamdownriver.org.
Got some great names if you could get those, yeah.
Our website is launched. We have a trailer and we're building out the website, and we will premiere a film in time for the 50th year anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which is in October.
Thank you so much for chatting with us, and good luck with all your future endeavors. I'm here chatting with Laura Seltzer-Duny, an award-winning producer and director with about 20 years of experience. She focuses primarily on documentaries and educational programs and has founded Seltzer Film and Video in service to her passion for producing videos that inspire change for social and environmental causes she believes in. Today, we're going to discuss 3 of her documentaries as we learn more about how she got them made. So, hi, Laura. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
So we're going to delve into a few of your more recent documentaries, but before we get into that, let's let listeners get to know you and your journey just a little bit more. How did you first get into this field? And when did you realize filmmaking was the lane you wanted to travel down?
Sure. So I started out working in photography in the early 90s, and I was up in New York City and realized that I wanted to broaden my scope, not just work on still images, but the moving picture. So I went to school at NYU and was studying film there. I ended up starting off in commercials, working on commercials and music videos, which was fun, but it didn't have the substance I wanted. So I volunteered on a documentary about HIV, living HIV positive, in the early 90s, which was kind of groundbreaking. And I found my passion. And ever since, that's my passion, to work on documentaries and educational programs. Not necessarily the money-making opportunities. I've been working in this field for many years and not having to go into another field to supplement my income. So we really can do it, but we are like the social workers in the field. You know, we're not going to be millionaires, but we're going to be fine. We're going to do well if we really pursue our passions.
You primarily produce and direct, but you've also done some camera work and things like that as well. Is that correct?
I have.
Do you want to focus mostly on producing and directing, or do you like dabbling in some of the other parts of filmmaking?
Okay, that is such a great question, because I'll just say, like, through the 90s, up in most of the early 2000s, I did not touch any equipment. And I feel like at that point in our documentary and professional worlds, it was separate. You had producers, directors, writers. You had the directors of photography, the audio, the lighting. Now, flash forward is when I had an opportunity to work on my very first documentary. It was called Last Boat Out. It was a PBS film. It was my first independent film. And I had no choice but to pick up a camera. And my dear friend and colleague of many, many years, we work on a lot of each other's films, Karen Hayes, she said, borrow my camera, go out, film it. And I'm so nervous. And I did it. I filmed most of that film myself, that documentary myself. And that's a big takeaway that I just want to tell you guys who are listening, that yes, that was 2007, and it was a bigger camera, and it was, professional gear. But we don't need professional gear is great, but let me just flash forward now to our current film in progress, who I'm an impact producer on, but I'm also filming on it, a camera person. I'm shooting on an iPhone. I'm using 4K. I'm shooting it with this app called Filmic. If you guys don't know of that one, look that up. You can purchase it. It's a very affordable app on your phone. I'm using a gimbal. These gimbals you can hold and really create these beautiful, beautiful pans. And with Filmic, you can get the aperture. My point is, don't be afraid to pick up the camera and cover the important footage that needs to be captured, because it gives you this opportunity to, like, you can use it in conjunction with a professional camera person's work, or it can become your film.
Oh, yeah. The advancements in technology have made so much more accessible, and especially in the world of documentary. Do you have a particular filmmaker or anything that you consider a source of inspiration, or someone you hope to emulate or get to be like? Or is it just you enjoy it and you were going to be yourself?
It's interesting that when I moved to Washington, D.C., when I decided to get into the documentary and educational world, I went, no joke, I went to the Women in Film. That was the first thing I did. I went to the president, Jennifer Courtner. She was the president at the time, and she sat down with me. She was amazing. She gave me a whole list of the top documentary filmmakers in Washington, D.C. I reached out to every single one of them. I actually wrote like handwritten letters, which is another thing that we don't do anymore. But wow, wouldn't that be an interesting concept to like write a letter to people? Personal letters.
I do some sometimes still, but yeah, it's throwback.
A great idea. Such a great idea, right? Well, I ended up working with so many of those filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, working for them, like as a production assistant or an associate producer or archival researcher. And they're my role models. So I'm grateful. I'm so grateful to Women in Film and to have been a member of this organization for so long.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, people you work with. It doesn't have to be some famous name that everyone will know right off the top. You get your inspiration wherever you can.
Yeah, but some of these filmmakers in Women in Film are in our local chapter are famous.
Oh yeah, right. No, sure.
Jenny Duran, Ricky Green, Michael Carr, Aviva Kempner, just some truly great role models in our community.
So onto your creations, the ones that we're going to talk about today. We're going to discuss The Last Boat Out, which was released in 2010, a 28-minute PBS doc about a family of watermen trying to preserve their way of life working on the Chesapeake Bay, which is also a story about pollution as well. Then Nobody Wants Us from 2020, which is an Emmy-nominated 35-minute PBS historical doc about refugees coming to America and their issues being able to disembark and all of that stuff from their ship. And then finally, a little bit about Las Abogadas, which is coming up later this year, about women attorneys on the front lines of the migrant crisis. So overall, when do you realize that you found a subject that you want to bring to light in a documentary? Like, how do you know it's a piece that's a story worth pursuing, but turning into a visual documentary as well as just a subject you care about?
A lot of times people will come to me with a story and it takes a little time for it to resonate that it's really a good story for me. So I have to actually go out and spend time before I start to film, or spend time on the phone with them before I start to film, and really just talk about it, talk to the experts, talk to the subject matter experts, the people who are really familiar with the story, who went through the story. And as you're filming it, often it takes me a little time to start the filming process, and then it starts to all come about that this is a story that I really want to make a full half hour, which tends to be my sweet spot, or it could be a 1 hour, which is also a sweet spot of mine, or perhaps it's just a segment that might be on something else.
The content, and as you're collecting it, sort of informs the length of it in the finished form. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So the order of things, I assume, gets a little bit muddied, but as you said, you go out and you start doing interviews. Is doing interviews one of the first steps that you do in this?
The first step is to do the research and to figure out what the storylines are, and to make phone calls and to take diligent notes, and then find whatever else is there for the historical research in the background. And then I do go out and film interviews, typically. Like, for example, Nobody Wants Us, this film about Holocaust refugees who were hoping to find safety in the United States. The first thing I did, because sadly, these people in 1940, most have passed away. Literally only one person on this one ship that came to the U.S. is still living from that ship. But in 2012, someone came to me about the story. I didn't know how far the story would become, if it would become an Emmy-nominated, film on PBS, or if it would just be a family history video. But I went and interviewed the few still living in 2012. It sat in the archive for several years. And then in 2019, it really became apparent that it was time to tell this story. And we did.
Do you have multiple projects working at the same time because of how long sometimes they can take to research and gather more content? So do you typically have more than one kind of going at once?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Often I'm working on more than one documentary. One might be in development phase, one might be in filming stage, one might be in post-production phase. But really, what is really imperative is also to have like corporate clients and nonprofit clients. So I'll film a variety of short projects throughout, because that's really what, a lot of the bread and butter, where it comes from.
Yeah. What pays the bills.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because not every good cause it doesn't come with a big paycheck there. It's important to get it out, but you're not doing it for...
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes you can get some great seed money from an investor who really cares about the project, and that helps a lot. Grants have never been my thing. There's some filmmakers out there who are just phenomenal at getting the grants, but that is why you do have to supplement it with other ways of other film ways of making an income by making films.
Yeah. So in terms of documentary storytelling, is there a main difference between documentary versus like a fictional narrative? I mean, I know you want both to be compelling in their own ways, but how do you personally feel like the different forms are their own thing?
What I love about documentaries is that they are first person telling the story about those the real true story, whether it's actual interviews that you can conduct. My film in development right now is about refugees in 1860. They were slaves seeking freedom in Virginia. And they're not living. I don't even know who I'm telling the story about yet. It's just all in my mind, but I'm going to have to somehow find the stories and give them their voice, but it's got to be true, as much fact as you can pull together. But for documentaries, that's what I love, is that when you're watching it, hopefully the filmmaker is telling the most truth that's possible of telling their story.
Yeah, so that's true. There's a responsibility to present these as accurately and fairly as possible. How do you ensure that you're painting like an honest and respectful picture of a subject?
I always have subject matter experts, and not just one or two, and not just a few from like a certain point of view. You always need like subject matter experts on a variety of fields, whether it's someone who is a historical expert or who specifically knows that very, very specific story, or someone who knows the broad picture story. And that's critical. And then, if you're telling a film about the environment, like, for example, The Last Boat Out, that was about a very specific story of a family of fishermen, watermen down in my hometown port in the Chesapeake Bay in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And yes, that's important to tell their story, but then I needed to talk to the environmental experts who can talk to me about the Chesapeake Bay, about the watershed that's 64,000 square miles, or someone just about the James River. So it's just a lot of research that is imperative to tell a good quality film.
In addition to all of the interviews and, footage of the actual like place or event or whatever, because, subject matter is different, obviously, if it's historical versus a modern day thing or a current issue. But if you're doing stuff that uses archival footage, are you getting a lot of that from National Archives or different places? Where are you sourcing a lot of your archival footage? And is that part of what makes the DC area great? Because we do have things like the National Archives right here.
It is so great to have the National Archives in your back pocket. I mean, a lot of, so my last film was about during the Holocaust, World War II in 1940. So I was able to go to the U.S. Holocaust Museum in 14th Street in D.C. But nowadays, almost everything's online. That is another beauty of today and difference. In the past, I've worked on other films, not my own films, but other films for like Cronkite Ward or McNeil Lear Productions. I used to work on projects for them. And we would have to trek down to the archives, go and acquire the images there. Then, you actually pull the footage and bring it back to the office. You don't have to do as much of that anymore. Now I can go to British Path in Britain and access their library, or a library in New York. And I really don't think I had to leave my house to access footage for my last film.
Have you ever run into any like accessibility issues or like even legal issues about getting something? Or if you're using, for example, like news footage that aired or anything, how do you go about getting that and getting the permission to use some of the footage? Or do you just skip that footage if it's going to be too tricky?
It's interesting. There have been times where I've acquired or I found some great footage or maybe a great piece of music where you're trying to clear it and you write the owners, you write the publishers, you write the composers, you write everybody, I'm thinking about music right now. But yeah, if you can't get permission, sometimes your lawyer, your entertainment lawyer that you work, I highly recommend consulting with lawyers when you're doing this and you run into these problems. They might recommend, okay, what is your due diligence? Did you write them? Did you email them? Did you call them? Do you have records of this? How many times did you reach out to them? Who else did you reach out to? And if you have a record of all this outreach you've done, you might be able to use something. Or often you just use something else.
Do you have a team that you've put together over time that's sort of your core team that you work with frequently?
I feel like on every single project, you have new people that you bring in because they bring in new lights. They shine new ideas into the project. But often I work with Bob Canner, who is a phenomenal editor. I can do everything okay. So I string the films out, I string the projects out, and then he comes in and makes things sing. I can write okay. And then Victoria Bruce comes in and she's like, wait, why don't you just move that around a little bit? When you're so thick in the weeds, she's so great at looking at that big picture and helping you hone in. Or, and I can shoot, but there is nothing like a great DP. I love the DPs at Ventana Productions. So I have my go-to team, but I love, it's really great to always work with new people.
Let's talk a little bit about Seltzer Film and Video. You created this production company, I guess. Yeah.
LLC.
It seems like it's also a good resource for people as well for what they might need. So when did you found it and what are its goals?
I created it because I wanted to make video content that would affect change, not just documentaries, but also work with nonprofits and causes that were producing short form content. So I love doing that. I've had so much fun doing that over the years. I did something with AmeriCorps where we inspired people to volunteer, and that it's not just, it was in honor of Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day, but inspiring people to volunteer all year round. And I did that. I worked on that with, the team at Ventana Productions as well. They're also a great resource, like in my back pocket team, that I work with.
Do you think your process of filmmaking would be much different if you didn't have Seltzer Film? What do you think would be different about that?
I think that becoming an LLC is something that just gives you some credibility in the community outside of our filmmaking community, so that an AmeriCorps or the American Psychological Foundation will be able to hire you as a company, and then they know that you're going to be able to pull it all together from start to finish. And that's really a fun thing. I'm not just a producer, I'm not just a director or a writer, but I will pull together the budgets, I will put the proposals together, the contracts, the filming, work with my filming team and my editing team, and then produce, deliver the products.
What are some things that you remember that you learned on one project that you applied to a subsequent one?
So I brought on an EP, executive producer, a little bit later in the game. And on our current film, we have an EP who came on really early in the game. That's one thing I learned. That is a takeaway. And if you're looking for an EP, and you can have several. That's another piece of advice. You don't need one executive producer. Having a few, and they don't have to be in our field at all. That's the other takeaway is. What's great is like our current executive producer, it's a film about lawyers who are helping refugees. She is a seasoned corporate immigration lawyer in New York, and she's amazing. She doesn't know anything about the field, but she knows about the topic. She knows about the connections. She knows who to connect us with. She's a great writer. She's a full-fledged member of our team. And she's teaching us and we're teaching her because we're making all of those connections. And it's a lot of fun to be working with someone like that.
So with each piece, was there a particular challenge that you remember that you had, or something that even went better or easier than you expected on each of the pieces?
Well, with Nobody Wants Us, that Women in Film is my fiscal agent. It premiered in early 2020, which was right when the pandemic started. And it was such a bummer. I had so many screenings scheduled and some film festivals scheduled. I got to go to one film festival only. And then the pandemic hit, and it was a real blow. But I shifted and I started doing virtual screenings, a lot of them. And I loved it. But I'm sitting here in my home, and that's not fun, to always have to be home because I'm such a people person. And there is nothing like going to a theater, seeing your film on the big screen, and then having all these people talk to you about your film or about, the topics related to the film. And so we did it. We shifted to Zooms. And it was fun because I was able to reach people, and we all can now reach people. There's a Portuguese ambassador who was a hero in Nobody Wants Us. And I've been talking to people in Portugal. I've been doing screenings with people in Portugal in attendance. But otherwise, it would have been like the locals, in each location. Yeah. So that's like a positive spin on something that was really a blow for that film. Same with that happened with our current film too, with the pandemic, but I'm not sure. It hit us in the middle of production. Yeah. So we were in full-fledged production filming mode, and then the pandemic hit. Honestly, that is going to be part of the film that's going to make it that much more interesting, how the refugees have been having to cope with the pandemic, but it definitely expanded our production time.
Sounds like sometimes the disadvantage can become an advantage, and sometimes it's you just got to pivot and make it work.
Absolutely.
So once you feel like a documentary is done, once you feel like you have it pretty much the way you want it, what is your next step? Do you take it to festivals next? Is that always the first next step?
So my passion is education. So that's my passion. And so I am always thinking about what is the impact that my film is going to have. So I have been, for the current film, I'm their impact producer. And as an impact producer, my job is to figure out how that film can reach the most people and make change happen. So we try and get the film in front of people who are changing public policy. How can these people use the film to make their change happen even, broader or more specific, go deeper with our story, using our film as a tool for them, or getting it into the schools and the future lawyers, the future refugee advocates. But you asked about film festivals, and that's so much fun. And my director is really interested in getting the film into festivals as well as the whole team. And we're going to hopefully have a lot of fun with that too. But if you produce a meaningful, timely, both, film, documentary, I just want to say that, like, the people who are listening, if you have a film that you produced 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 5 years ago, you might want to pull it out and see who could be using it now, because they can live for a long time, especially if you get distributed if you have an educational distributor. So I have an educational distributor. I work with New Day Films, and the film can live forever, especially if you create material around to accompany the film, which I'm doing with our current film and we did with our last.
How did you get involved with New Day Films? Like, how do you hook up with a educational distributor?
Someone recommended that I check them out, and I went to their site, and there's a way to apply. And you fill out, it's almost like a grant. You fill out a in-depth application, and then
you're doing grants without even realizing it.
You're doing a grant. You're doing yet another grant. And I had a lot of that content for the grant, so you just kind of repackage it all. But it definitely takes time and to pull that together. And then you're vetted. It's a cooperative. That company, New Day Films, is a cooperative owned by filmmakers. So we have like 300 filmmakers, which is really neat because you're automatically connected to this big family of filmmakers. And they vote on your film, and then they invite you, and then it's a whole process.
I was curious about, films that, because these are about causes and you want to, incite some change. Like, do you often do follow-ups to see if change has happened, or, follow up on what, for example, like in Las Abogadas, maybe down the line, you could see what personal impact some of these people have had on individuals. Do you plan to do that? Or is that something that just, if it happens to come up, you follow through and add on?
So as the impact producer for Las Abogadas, we 100% plan to do that. And we plan on doing it on a broad scale, like what's happening with public policy on the big picture, even though the film is really going to focus more on these personal stories and not do much preaching. It really will be focusing on the stories.
If someone was wanting to get into documentary filmmaking, is there any particular advice that maybe you had known going in that you would want to impart to people excited to get into the field?
I think that you should just look around for the people who inspire you and reach out to them and see if you can get, if you're not in the field yet, see if you can get an internship or see if you can work for them. And there's just nothing like learning on the job. And actually, a lot of these filmmakers that I reached out to in the mid-90s, they didn't have job opportunities for me, but I went and I treated them for coffee. I just met with them and I had informational interviews. And honestly, within a few years, I think I worked for all, if not all of them. So that's just something to think about. Just don't be afraid to reach out to the people that you want to work for. And don't forget, we've got a lot of amazing filmmakers in this area. So you don't have to go to LA, you don't have to go to New York, you can, but you can also find an amazing group of filmmakers in our backyard.
If anyone wants to see any of these documentaries, obviously Las Abogadas is not out yet, but if they wanted to see Last Boat Out or Nobody Wants Us, how would they go about doing that?
The easiest thing is to go to seltzerfilmvideo.com. No end, just seltzerfilmvideo.com. And right on that main page at the top, you can click on each of the film's websites and go from there.
Excellent. And they can also learn more about you and your company there as well. So yeah, I mean, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on yet?
One thing I'm kind of excited about, and I'd like to share it with you, is what I'm doing now is we're doing a new outreach campaign for Nobody Wants Us. And that film, which is about refugees that were hoping to find freedom in the U.S. in 1940, one of the heroes, this is a great tip, one of the heroes in the film has a foundation in his name. They are sponsoring this fundraiser on Go Lively. That's a platform like GoFundMe. And so they're sponsoring it. And what the campaign is doing is for every amount we raise, we are actually able to distribute the film to a new school. And the coolest thing that I love, this is what really where my heart is people can donate the film in honor of a loved one. So it doesn't have to be somebody involved in a Holocaust story, but there are a lot of Holocaust survivors that we're actually donating films to specific schools around the country.
Thank you for joining us and talking to us about these 3 important and impactful films.
Thank you so much, Candice. It was great talking with you.
Thank you for listening to Media and Monuments, a service of Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. Please remember to review, rate, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. For more information about WIF, please visit our website at WIF as in Frank, V as in Victor.org.